Perfect. I heard the ping, so we are live. Welcome, Sonia. Welcome. How are you today?
I am fantastic and I'm thrilled to be here and thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's my absolute pleasure. I cannot wait. So we've got so much to cover and not a huge amount of time. So I will start with an introduction and then we'll just dive straight in and we'll flow through the questions like one of those old school 90s bands that you and I both like, if that's all
Ah,
right.
nice, nice. Although, old school for me is probably not the same as old school for you. I was actually there when all of that came out in real time. So,
Fair play. So an old school band, we'll leave it as that so we can be inclusive, irrespective of the decade in which we emerged.
nice.
I love it. All right, awesome. So, for anyone that's tuned in, for everybody that's tuned in, rather, welcome to Coffee with Kofi, where we explore bold leadership journeys and the stories behind meaningful work. Today, I'm joined by Sonya Wiegle, the CEO and founder of Next Stage Bio and a driving force behind the Catalytic Collective, which we'll hear more about. Sonya operates at the intersection of biotech innovation and women's leadership, blending commercial rigor that is interwoven with deep, deep purpose. In this conversation, we will explore Sonia's path through science, strategy, and entrepreneurship, plus what it really takes to build a career that's both high impact and deeply aligned. Not always easy to get, but I think Sonia has cracked it. So grab your coffee, your juice, your water, and let's sip into that inspiration. Welcome to the show, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thrilled, thrilled.
Awesome, awesome. So diving straight in, I always love to give people some context as to who it is that they're listening to or that they're watching if they choose to watch it. So in 60 seconds or potentially less, if you can possibly do it, please can you give us the context to the character that is the woman, Sonia, that we see before us today or hear before us?
Sure. So in 60 seconds or less, my origin story.
Yeah.
I think I'm an entrepreneur at heart. It's in my DNA. And, I wasn't necessarily raised to be, but it's kind of where I think I've always leaned. I started my first business in the fourth grade. And I was selling stickers on the playground. I would have my dad take me to the farmer's market on the weekends and I'd buy. Back then, there were these really cool things called scratch and sniff Snickers, and there were
I remember. Yeah.
stickers, right? And so I would buy rolls of them and put them in a shoebox and then take them to the playground and sell out. And before long, I was coming home from school with like rolls of cash. And I was sort of, I was the connection for these amazing stickers. And it got really big really fast. And, my dad kind of shut it down because he's like, you can't be in fourth grade walking around with all of this cash, but fair. But what that kind of showed me was I love the idea of this entrepreneurial piece. And in spite of the fact that the world I came up in was one that really encouraged you to get a job and stick with it, I always felt the lean towards doing my own thing. So even when I was in graduate school at Carnegie Mellon, the reason I chose Carnegie Mellon over some of the other schools is because they have a very pragmatic approach to education. So rather than studying theory, you actually get in and you do the work. And Carnegie Mellon allowed me to create a consultancy while I was there that was aligned with our curriculum. So, I would, if we were studying strategic planning, I would go find a strategic planning client and they would evaluate me on both my ability to sell, win, and deliver these consulting engagements, but the client themselves would evaluate me on the delivery of it. And CMU sort of wrapped up that into my experience. So I was sort of creating my own internship opportunities, but also sort of testing the idea of entrepreneurship in that way. And, all along the way, I've just created businesses, sold businesses, start other things, aligned with my own sort of personal needs and the needs of my family. But it's always been a very natural thing for me to do that. And if I really think back to when I was 10 years old or whenever I was, that's sort of in me. So that's how I got here.
No, what an amazing way to do it. And you pretty much did it. You pretty much nailed the 60 seconds. For all of that is super impressive. It's a challenge that I set because I'm mischievous. Not many people do it. So the 10th grade, fourth grade, is that about 10 years old? Is that what you were sort of saying, or did I?
Well, so the reason why I trip on that a bit is because I actually started kindergarten a year early. And so I've always been a year younger than my peers. So when I align my age with the grade, it's always a little off. Yeah, the rest of the kids in the neighborhood were going off to kindergarten, and I told my parents I wanted to do the same. And they said, well, you're too young. And I said, why? So they went to the principal of the school in an effort to appease me, I think, so that, if at least this person in authority told me I was too young to go, that should satisfy me. And he said, well, you know what, we'll test her and see. And I tested great. So he said, there's no reason for her not to go. So I did.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Okay, so that makes sense. So fourth grade was when the sort of entrepreneurial bug bit you, but from earlier on, it sounds like you're asking questions and challenging the status quo. And I would also say quite persuasive with it if you got your parents to agree to speak to the principal. So yeah, I'm getting the sense of the character that is Sonya. I'm hearing it.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know how I did that, but here we are.
Here we are. So fantastic insight into your beginnings on that journey. And as I was saying earlier, you've built a career that's at the intersection of science, strategy, and leadership. But I suppose what we don't know is what first drew you into the biotech space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I said, I did my grad work at Carnegie Mellon, and I went right into global consulting, and eventually landed with Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture, and was focused on the life sciences practice area. So that was my first introduction to life sciences, which, in the Philadelphia area here is big pharma. But it was when I started having my children that I started my own consultancies, because I couldn't fathom the idea of traveling 5 days a week and being away from my children. So this was the best way for me to do the work that I love to do and still raise my family. And with that, I started consulting on my own with big pharma. And then that evolved into smaller pharma, doing M&A integration consulting. And then, with sort of the deconstruction and deconsolidation of that industry. And I sort of followed baby pharma into then biotech. And that's how I landed in biotech. And, the throughput for all of this for me is my personal commitment and just interest in this industry evolved the same way that my interaction with it did, in that I now find myself so excited and honored to be part of the biotech community, because I'm just deeply committed to early drug discovery and the innovation around bringing new drugs to untreated diseases. And in biotech, it's very much the innovation space of life sciences, right? And it's discovering things that haven't been discovered before. And because you're at such the cutting edge of these concepts, when you finally get it to market and you get the drug commercialized, your connection or your ability to connect directly with the patients and their families and caregivers is so direct. Unlike in a big pharma situation, in biotech, you're really fully aligned with these patients. You understand them, you know their stories, you see the impact of the drug. And for someone who's not a scientist, to be able to operate in that space is extraordinarily rewarding. And so to the extent that I can, through my skill sets and my experience, help to upskill and enable these amazing people to operate individually in their highest and best use, but to also operate within organizations that are culturally, behaviorally, in terms of their ways of working, aligned to where those folks can excel and be retained to do so, and to open up doors for new career entrants into that space. To the extent that I get to influence that is just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. And there are two things that are impactful to all of us, wherever we may be in the world or on whatever spectrum we want to measure ourselves against. And that's, I think, really your health and your wealth. And I think someone said it to me the other day. It was a beautiful phrase, that health is like a crown that is invisible to the wearer, but visible to anyone that doesn't have it, you know?
Mhm.
And I was like, dang, that's so, like, you take it for granted, but the minute you have a health problem, then you have problems. Like, until you have a health problem, I mean, have issues, but do you know what I mean? Like, the context is different. So when you say what you say so passionately, I can see why it drew you. But what I love is how the initial opportunity to get into the field through the Anderson role then morphed through your personal needs and desires to raise a family, which then saw the pivot towards consultancy. And so I like that, in that sometimes with these stories, it's not prescriptive, it's not already written, it's kind of, as we need to, we evolve as individuals. And it sounds like that's what you've done. Does that seem about right?
Yes, no, very much so. And that is, the least prescriptive thing that you probably do. When I was coming up, this sort of pivot was not necessarily common, right? So, even if you are in global consulting, the idea was to be on that partner track and to stay on that track, right? And so for me to say, I'm going to pull myself off of this track and do things a little differently, which is a bit high risk. But to me, the bigger risk was not to be there for my children. I remember a conversation when I was at Anderson. It was an anecdotal conversation with one of the women partners, and her children were much older than mine. I think I was expecting at the time my first, and I think her kids were early teens or teens. And she was contemplating leaving the business because she felt like she was missing it. They were all, in their teens, and she was feeling sort of regretful and remorseful about that. And she suggested to them, hey, I could retire and be here more. And the response to her was, but does that mean we still get the pool? And so that kind of gutted her, but it really was informative to me. And I wasn't even in a place where I'd even had a baby yet. I was expecting one, and I was fully expecting to get a good nanny and keep it moving, because that's what all the women in my sphere of influence would do. But it sat with me, and I recalled that memory years later when that baby was 2, and I was expecting another one, and my 2-year-old was calling the nanny mommy, and and I was feeling like, oh, I don't want to be there in 10, 15 years. I've got an opportunity now to course correct so that I can look my kids in their eyes on their level every day, so that they know every word that they say is the most important word to me in that moment. I didn't want to fast forward and look back remorsefully or regretfully on their childhood and think, and for them to say, yes, but I'd rather you still work so that we can afford a pool as opposed to your being here with me. So on the face of it, that's risky, but for me, the bigger risk was not being there for them and betting on myself to say, I could start something where I could still earn a living, but raise a family at the same time.
Yeah, and that is authenticity at its core, right? Like doing what works for you, irrespective of the direction that the rest of the world is swimming in, much like salmon or trout in the rivers that have, right, like everyone's going this way, and then Sonya's like, actually, I'm gonna go upstream or downstream. I'm going the other way. And everyone's like, but we always go this way, and I think this is not, for me, about what is superior in terms of choices, be it entrepreneur, great corporate citizen, stay-at-home mum that works consulting, whatever it is. I think my hope and my dreams are that everyone finds that authenticity within themselves to do what works for them, not what they should do, but what works for them. So thank you. That's a beautiful one to take us on to the next question, which is, as CEO of Next Stage Bio-Advisors, my understanding of it is that you help organizations, using all of that experience that you've gathered and garnered, navigate complexity as well as growth. What's one leadership lesson biotech has taught you that you think could potentially apply to any industry?
The cool thing about biotech is it's transformative in every way, not just for the business, but for the people that occupy the business. It all requires dramatic and constant transformation. So when you look at the evolution of a biotech company, it starts in a lab, normally with a brilliant scientist and a couple of others that take a chance around a molecule that might possibly be a solution for something that's never been solved before. And then you have to transform that science into something that can be sold to a set of investors who also believe in it and will capitalize the effort that will hopefully get it to a successful phase 1 trial, which will then open the door to more capital to then create the company that's going to get it far enough along the clinical pathway to commercialization and into patients. The same transformation happens with the people. So you have a scientist who in every way needs to be extremely detail-oriented, involved in every aspect of the experiment design and execution, is collaborative in every way because they've got to bring others along to do that. That same brilliant scientist is likely the CEO of this enterprise now. The skills that a CEO needs to take that concept and distill it and sell it in a way that investors and then employees and then the FDA will buy onto. It's a very different skill set. It's a transformation from being a detail-oriented, collaborative leader, individual, to the transformation into leadership that says, I'm not in control of every detail, nor should I be. I need to be the conductor of this orchestra, not first chair clarinet, not specialist, generalist. I need to not be as collaborative because decision-making needs to now be faster. So not everybody can come along because if I take too long to make a decision, what the deck looks like for the investors, as an example, if I get too bogged down by the details, if I sacrifice the process on the altar of perfection, which is what the lab requires, I may miss the opportunity. I may miss the opportunity. And so the intersection I like to play is helping that CEO to transform from that brilliant scientist into this transformational leader and helping them to see the world a little differently so that they can take this concept all the way into a patient.
That is super applicable across the board, because as you're saying that, and I'm going to have to play this back, sacrificing on the altar of perfection is a phrase I have not heard, but I'm going to borrow it. Sonya, thank you. But I think it's so true of all industries, where I was literally talking about this yesterday, how leaders and or managers, interchangeable to a degree, but different, are usually chosen by organizations due to their technical expertise or their tenure, and usually a combination of the two, right? And what makes a technically brilliant anything, let's not just call it a scientist, but a finance person, a lawyer, or what have you, is not the same as what makes a brilliant leader. So I see when you talk about that shift from being detail orientated, hands-on, to visionary that can delegate, but still needs to have enough knowledge of the detail not to get thrown in at the deep end when an investor asks a question that you really should know. I see the need for what you do there and really helping individuals evolve in that transformation journey. So thank you. That's brilliant answer. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something else that you do, and there's lots that you do, so there's lots to talk about. So you work with the Catalytic collective. I really vibe with, because of the focus on supporting women. And for me, I was curious to understand what gap you saw that made you think this really needs to exist and now,
So it's entirely selfish, and the gap was my own. And that was, I found myself at a stage of my life, both professionally and personally, where I decided it was time to center myself. So those son babies that I was talking about before are now fully grown adults, the youngest of which is a senior in college. And everybody looks at that inflection point, and any parent looks at that inflection point and says, okay, what's next? And I was surrounded by peers, mommy peers, who were all like, oh, what do I do now? And in talking with my youngest about what she wants to do next, she was so excited and just nervous and all of the things that happen. And I thought, oh gosh, she has her whole life ahead of her. It was really exciting for her. And I was probably a little bit more circumspect about this because this was the last time I was having the nature of this kind of conversation with one of my children, because she was the youngest to launch. But it occurred to me after sitting with it, I have my whole life ahead of me too. Sure. And I've got the benefit of 30 more years of lived experience. And so in every way that I'm encouraging her to intentionally carve her path for her next chapter, I've decided to do the same for myself. And what that looked like was, okay, so my next inflection point is going to be an exit out of this biotech that I'm working for. One way or another, it's going to exit, as all biotechs do. What do I want to do next? And how do I want to center myself next? I want, after 30 years of full focus on my career, my marriage, motherhood, what does life look like for me? And so I was very intentional about curating that. And for me, that meant next stage bio advisors, but in a different way, with more of a focus on CEO advisory and board advisory, and less focus on structured projects, which opens up space for me to do podcasts, or maybe host a podcast, or start the Catalytic Collective, which is mirrored on my own journey. And it's centered on women who also have 20 plus more years of professional experience, sitting in a C-suite role in the life sciences or senior executive role, possibly looking at an empty nest, but has had a catalyst that says, it's my turn, it's my time. How do I curate and navigate this next chapter in a way that centers me? And so the name Catalytic Collective is very intentional. The word catalytic really refers to that catalyst that launches you into that next stage. But you want enough lived experience, both professionally and personally, to be able to identify and stitch together all of the catalysts in your life that create the narrative that informs your decision around what that next chapter should be. And so that requires time and space. So I don't work with early career entrants or mid-career folks. I really focus on a mirror of myself, because I want to create a space where we have true peer-to-peer connection in terms of professions, and also our personal. So we're all dealing with parenting adult kids, aging parents. We have these things in common.
Yes.
And we want to focus on freedom, however we define it, and to determine what that next stage is through the lens of that freedom. So we're not planning the way that we used to. We're planning with ourselves at the center. And then the collective part of the name is what happens when you bring all of these women together as a collective. These powerful women who have scaled very unique glass ceilings because of the biotech and life sciences industry. We're used to being the only woman in the room from elementary school, when we were engaged in the sciences and honors classes and other things, which are often centered around boys. We've always been the only. We have that in common. We've operated in a highly compliant driven industry. We have that. We've done hard things, right? And when we have professional discussions, there's a glossary of terms that we all know.
Yes. I'm sure.
So, and so it didn't start out just as life sciences, but it sort of evolved into that. And I'm happy to let it kind of decide what it wants to be. And that's kind of where it landed.
That is powerful stuff, really powerful stuff. And it's like you found a niche within the niche, but also, I think it's like when we were speaking before, and I was sort of saying how I really feel we needed your story to be shared and put out there on many platforms, not just this one, but I know you've done other things in the past. Because when you explain it, it really helps me to understand that life it's generally lived progressively, as in you wake up, you get up, you move forward, one foot in front of the other, and then you hit an obstacle and you go around it or over it or under it, whatever. Then you move to the next milestone and the next. But to really understand the journey that you've been on, you need to have those inflection points where you look backwards and then see, wow, look at the heights that I've scaled or the distance that I've traveled. And I feel that with the Catalytic Collective, you've got this really powerful hub, and if I may say so, a home for women who've done similar things, where you can get recalibration, rejuvenation, or just general reassurance that you're not going crazy, because not many people are going to understand what you've done to get to where you are. Do you know what I mean? So for me, does that sound like I've got it, I get it, or is it slightly different to that? Please don't be afraid.
You nailed it. That's exactly what it's intended to be. We're creating rooms and spaces for genuine connection. And, you know, we're able to, because of everything that we have in common, including the journey we're on, whether that's a journey of redefining leadership in your current role, right? So you're not ready to exit your C-suite role, but you're wanting to do it in a way that serves you as opposed to depletes you. Or you're ready to exit and move on to the next thing. Maybe that's a business venture. You know, maybe that's writing that book finally. You know, maybe it's standing on stages to speak. I've got some that want to be travel bloggers. You know, I mean, it's whatever that next piece is, but there's a safety in that room because we don't have to explain ourselves when we want to talk about the non-negotiables that we've now placed on the table. There's nobody judging us for it. There's nobody asking us for career advice. There's nobody questioning, oh, well, you just exited out of the biotech and you made a few $1 million. What are you complaining about?
No, you understand,
right? There's a space to have that conversation where no one's going to say that to you.
No, and I think those spaces, I feel, are really important. I'm all for being inclusive and everyone being together and all, but I feel that there is something about a space where it is effortless in terms of the understanding. You talk about acronyms, you know, in other sectors I've worked in, like financial services. Oh my God, folks love an acronym in there, you know. Most sectors you will go into, if you're there for any amount of time, there's some acronyms and then some phraseology that will befuddle an English speaker because it doesn't. You don't use those terms normally. But I think when I look at my desk, this from what you just said comes to mind. So this egg timer thing here, which is the sands of time just sort of flowing through the funnel. I think I hear that there's a recognition from you and the women that join that there is limited time, but there's time to also take a different direction and be excited, much like your daughter was excited about what comes next, but from a place of intentionality. You know, you may have been carried on a wave to a point, but looking at those sands of time, like, do you want to stay on that wave or not? Do you want to wait till the wave crashes out, or do you want to try and get off it? So I love that you're doing that. And I suppose you've answered the question that I had next, so I'm going to move on to something different, which was when we look at high profile, high achieving women in my work, and I appreciate in yours too, there can sometimes be this struggle for confidence or for visibility or for balancing what I think our generation is the first to do, which is modern womanhood, which can include, as you're testament to, leadership and the traditional role that women, or roles that women occupied as the homemaker, the primary caregiver, etc. And I see this in my work a lot, this conflict and clash between what many of us saw our mothers doing if we had them around or what have you, and what women now can do and can achieve. And I suppose my question around that was, what patterns do you see most often around that balancing act, and what helps shift the mindset to make it more enjoyable a journey rather than one that's riddled with guilt that I'm not great at this or I'm not great at that, and I'm just basically just muddling through life, just messing up everything, which is not the case, but do you know what I mean? That sort of negative self-talk that can happen.
Yeah, no, that can easily happen, and it does happen, because it goes so far beyond even your own expectations of yourself. But in the instance of this particular topic, there are societal expectations and requirements and rules also that inform this and may add to that negative self-talk, because if society is also speaking negatively about whatever lane you choose, that's something that we have to deal with in very real time. I think the best way to answer that question is to look at the evolution of women in the workplace and what's been required of them. I have a very good friend and colleague who is general counsel in Biotech, brilliant woman, started her career in the 70s. And she tells this great story about, and by the way, she had 7 children. Seven children and never skipped a beat. And she talks about how early in her career, working in law firms, she was expected to dress like the men and to be as masculine as possible, to really suppress her femininity in order to be part of it, right? So the men did not want to be made uncomfortable in the femininity. And so, being a high-powered attorney, it really required her to mirror their behaviors, their countenance in a way that allowed them to just freely move in a way that made them comfortable, which I thought was super interesting. And then when I came up, it was the evolution of this whole part-time thing. So, when I left global consulting, I left mostly because I was told, well, we're going to put you on the mommy track, which is not the partner track, by the way. And what they were trying to do, this was their women mother-friendly attempt to say, well, we're going to take you off travel. We're going to put you on a local client, which in consultant speak this is where you go to die because you're not viable. And we're going to take your raises from 18% down to 3% because you're not viable, but at least you don't have to travel around away from your baby. I mean, there was no upward mobility in that, which is what was told me, okay, well, this isn't a place. There's got to be a way for me to add value and be a mom at the same time. And it's clearly not here. But this was the early attempts to try to that work-life balancing. That's what it looked like. And then it evolved into this part-time job share thing where you could share your role with another working mother, and the two of you make a whole, which, in practice falls down, because if you're a woman of capacity and ambition and talent, they're going to rely on you. You're going to do the job full time, and you're going to get part-time pay. And that's what always happens.
This is the thing.
So that was the next evolution of it. And so that's where I think you began to see women lean into entrepreneurship, because at the very least, I know I can rely on myself.
Got you.
And I can have my own agency in how I do this career. And I think that's where you began to see the evolution of women really getting into taking their leadership skills and getting into coaching, or whatever entrepreneurial suit that made sense. And I think the balance now is we're seeing those women now graduate into the C-suite and into boardrooms and into places where those decisions are being made about how we run this organization. And they're making space in ways that was not made for them, so that the women coming up who are balancing motherhood with their work are finding it, they're not doing it under the same scrutiny. They're not doing it with the same pressure. They're not paying the same price for doing that, because I think we have finally gotten to a place in time where there are not nearly enough but more women in the ultimate seat of power who can now have influence over what that work-life balance looks like, not just for women, by the way, but you're seeing paternity leave. You're seeing menopause care. So, it's not just mental health days, but there are spaces now in medical leave that allows for, if a woman is experiencing menopause and needs time away, so things are, women's health does not have nearly the spotlight on it that it needs. And, there's a long way to go. But again, as women begin to occupy these ultimate seats of power, we're beginning to see that, women coming up are not necessarily having to pay the same price that they did before.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for sharing and articulating that and really connecting some dots. So with what I do in the coaching space, I will help anybody that believes in better, that wants to excel at what they do. Like Venus and Serena, they had coaches and, that sort of thing. But I want to thank you because I've had this long-held passion and belief about supporting women and those that are in the global majority to either get to the top or stay there, because it's not always easy being the only in an organization or in government. And what has driven that desire has been this real belief that it isn't about favoritism at all, or making sure my daughters, of which I have two, have opportunities when they grow up. It's because I've had this belief that a leader that comes from that background, having had an experience of being an outsider on an inside of a government or a large corporation or small corporation, will lead very differently with some sensitivity towards cultural nuance, to gender nuance, but in essence will be good for the organization as a whole. And that's why I wanted to pause and thank you, because how you just explained it, with paternity leave changing, okay, menopause, yes, it's female related, but it impacts the whole workforce. And other things where we look at carers as a whole, not just if you have children, but to your point with the catalytic collection, we've got parents that are now finding the passing of the annual health check harder and harder, right? Like a car, the lights are coming on and some of them are not going off, and we now are managing that. Now, how does that impact your ability to lead or show up at work? And so I think that that observation that you have is reassurance for me, but also for many others, that it's not, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, it's not like, oh, like I win and you lose. It's really, we all win when we all win. That's
yes.
simple, but I don't understand why people don't seem to get that. But anyway, I digress. This wasn't the thing, but you said something. I said we were going to riff and we we're going to go off topic. So let me try and bring it back. But yeah, did you want to add anything to that before I try and remember what I was going to ask you next?
Yeah, you know what? The only thing that I would add to that is, and springboarding off of your comment based on your coaching, and I love the fact that you have a particular interest in coaching women through. That's really important. It can't just be women coaching women, because I think there's a two-sided benefit to that. For a woman to have the benefit of another experience, an outside experience, only sharpens her pursuit from good to great. But it also speaks to, I think, a growing, I hope, evolution around men in the workplace having a sensitivity, a sense of obligation to opening these doors and creating these pathways for everyone, women, every piece of the spectrum around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think a lot of that is driven by men who have daughters and are now seeing them through the lens of the future. And you're now the second man I've talked to in the last few weeks who have specifically called out a desire for their daughters to have a place and to have space when it's their turn to come into the workforce in whatever form or fashion they choose to do it. And they want their daughters to not have these constraints, these pitfalls, like all of the things, just hurdles. They want that cleared away. They want their daughters to be able to operate fully within their capacity, in the same way that their sons do. And I think that is a major change in how, as men come up in the workforce and how they get into positions of leadership. I feel like they're looking at it differently through the eyes of the opportunities for their daughters in the future.
No, you're totally right. And for me, it's quite eye-opening that I sit in a very, very privileged position, being a male of a certain height and a certain athletic ability. I do have to do some exercise to maintain it, but what that allows me to be is almost like a fish in water when I don't realize the male privilege and the physical privileges that I have. If I want to go for a jog at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, I think nothing of it. Not for a split second concerned about my well-being. Most likely people will be running across the road as I come along.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do anything, but I don't have to worry about my safety as a result of that. Certainly not at the moment, not in the UK. If my partner says to me at 9, 10 or 11 o'clock, she is going for a run, like my heart starts to beat different. I'm like, are you sure? No, because tomorrow when it's bright and lights out, and in that moment, I realized that is me being able to be me and not think about the fact that I am me. And I think if we embrace this abundance of thinking that by being authentic and supporting each other's journeys, we will make more magic and more money and more fulfillment and more meaning to work than anyone could imagine, we'll be in a good place. I think it's when we have this sort of scarcity mindset, which is it's you or me. Stuff loops that we're in at the moment where it's like, we got too much immigration, or we got too much there, or we got too much that. Oh, it's not that. There are other things at play that cause the challenges that we focus on. But this is not to get political. I'm not a political commentator. I'm just saying that I like to run it at nighttime. And now I realize I want a world where my partner and my daughters can also run at nighttime, but also reach the very top of whatever they decide to do, because it would crush me, like, to see them talented as they are and not reach their potential. Like, what that sucks. So let me do what I can.
To not reach their full potential because they've quite literally been blocked. Can't have that.
No,
the world can't have. The world needs them to reach their full potential.
Absolutely, and we will do what we can. So thank you. I told you we we're going to go off topic, but I didn't know what you were going to say, so but I'm enjoying myself a lot. So I've got a few more questions, and one is something that I didn't ask. How many children do you have? Because I think it's
three 27, 25 and 21.
Okay, these are not children anymore. I've changed it. How many young adults do you have?
Always babies to me. Always babies to me.
I know. So we're matching. So I've got 3 too, but not you. I'm going to ask you to send me postcards of what the view is like in the 20s, because at the moment I'm dealing with teens and almost teens. Yeah, we'll see. But kudos to you for that. And the question that I was going to ask following on for that is your career history. We've alluded to it before. I have. It absolutely fascinates me for the rich variety within it. Because when I was pulling this together, I was like, consulting. Then I saw some real estate. Then, of course, we talked about biotech. Now there's women's leadership development. And someone else that we have in common, you and I, is that you hosted a radio station once upon a time.
Yes.
I could your voice. I couldn't believe it. What? I suppose we need to unpack that in another conversation, but what framework did you use to decide when and what to explore as you sort of evolve through life? Because I've got the bit around the needs of the children, etc. But the different industries and the different technical disciplines speaks to a multi-talented individual. But I'd love for people listening to be like, okay, this is how I might frame my moves or exploration of different opportunities, if that makes sense.
Sure. You know, there's actually a term for it now that there wasn't when I was doing all of this, but, you know, people now refer to these portfolio careers.
Yes,
And,
yes.
you know, I talked to my youngest about that. I mean, I talked to all of my kids about centering their passion and creating a career around that and making that their plan A. My middle one is an actress. And, you know, all three of my kids went to college prep schools. And so, you know, the goal there is, you know, top tier school. That's, you know, we're drilling that into you from kindergarten. And when she was in high school, they were trying to keep her on that, but she really wanted to go performing arts. And her college counselor said to me in our meeting, you know, Lauren, don't you think you need to have a plan A? And she looked at me, she goes, right, Mom, she needs a plan A. And I was like, oh, no, a plan B. I said, I don't believe in plan B. There's plan A. Plan A can change.
Right.
And become a different plan A. But a plan B is a diluted plan A. You are diluting your efforts so that you get C all the way around. So we don't do that.
I love this.
So, you know, the idea of a portfolio career, which is what I talk to the women in the Catalytic Collective about, is the idea of centering your passion. And there's how many different income opportunities or streams can we create around this center passion or core skill set that you have. And I don't think you need to be late in your career to figure that out. I think, you know, with the evolution of AI and technology and information and everything else, you can create a portfolio career for yourself and you don't have to follow a traditional path. But before that term was created and accepted, that was sort of the driver for me, you know. So my predominant skill is around, you know, intuition-driven problem solving. So, you know, I'm a consultant by nature is what I know, and that's the basis of consulting, but that can actually manifest in different ways. And, you know, the entrepreneur in me always says yes. So along the way, you know, I was doing capital raising for early stage business development for professional athletes who were leaving the sport and wanted to know what to do next. They wanted some advice on starting businesses and raising capital and then operationalizing those businesses. And then eventually I got an opportunity to get into commercial real estate because of one of those athletes. And I was like, I don't know anything about commercial real estate, but it sounds fun. Let's do it. So got into that. And then, you know, it's just, I've gotten really good at Googling terms. Conversations. You know, the term dry powder came across and I was like, oh, what's that? Oh, okay, we've got capital to put to work. Oh, okay. You know, and it's just, and, you know, I'm very intuitive and very curious. And, you know, I'm just very risk tolerant. And I think why not? And to me, the risk of not giving it a shot is far higher than perhaps failure on that end. And I sort of subscribe to this idea of, well, what's the worst that could happen?
Oh, I like that.
The worst that can happen can always be mediated by something else.
Yeah.
It's never as bad as you think it's going to be. What's the worst that can happen if you don't pursue this? If you do pursue it, what's the best that can happen? Well, that's pretty cool and worth pursuing. So I'm going to take the shot. And so that's my throughput through all of these sort of, so I could never go get a traditional job, right? I could never go back to Accenture now. To come back and work with you because they're going to say, well, you know, it doesn't fit their algorithm.
You need to, this is the thing. I think it's there are boxes and it makes sense, you know, in a big corporate machine, industrial machine, specialization of, I can't speak, the specialization of labor or the division of labor helps it become more efficient. But I suppose I really pick out that intuition-led problem-solving ability. And it's, for me, it's like a muscle that develop over time. So you're not necessarily coming out of the womb with this, but as you practice it and you see the flip side of the bets you take on yourself and see that actually you didn't blow up. You're still here. It does
Yes.
get exciting. So this brings me on to one of my last questions, because I'm mindful. I will talk to you for hours, and you know I'm supposed to be in my daughter's school later, so I must start to
Yes, you
land.
must. Yes, you must. We'll pick it up later.
We'll do part two for sure. So I suppose building a company and building a community, they require different muscles, and I just wonder, well-being being something that's close to my heart, how you stay grounded while carrying a considerable level of responsibility on both parts, not to mention the young adults that and married, and so how do you stay balanced and grounded yourself?
One of the gifts that I gave to myself in this next chapter is the gift of slow mornings. And so one of my non-negotiables, are meetings before 10 a.m. So I did take a 9 a.m. meeting this morning, but it's because he was in Singapore.
Okay.
But so there are there are exceptions to the rule, but that slow morning gives me enough space to sit with gratitude even before I leave the bed. And then to have a nice cup of coffee with my husband, which, by the way, is a French press. So it's made with ritual. It's not curated. And it just slows me down. And it makes a phenomenal cup of coffee. And then it's to the gym or on a walk. I listen to podcasts while I walk. And so by the time I get to 10 a.m., I have slowly emerged in a joyful, peaceful, grateful state, spent some time with my husband, exercised a bit, attended to the emails and all of the things that need to kind of be just clear off the inbox kind of thing. So that by the time I get to that first meeting, I'm ready to go.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I love that joyful emergence into what can be a chaotic and noisy world, if you allow it to be, but with intention. I like the ritual as well. I love coffee. You probably guessed that by the name of this podcast, but I'm the same. The slower, the better, just to really take stock of what's around you and be present in like right now, right now, not what needs to happen in a few hours. So thank you. So my last question, Sonya, is about the year ahead. We are, believe it or not, almost into month 3. What does the year ahead hold for you on any of the platforms that you're building and developing?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this year. It's the year of the fire horse, which I'm excited about, and I'm fully emotionally and energetically aligned with the idea of acceleration this year. So last year was about creating a foundation that I believe in, and this year is about scaling it exponentially. And so, I've got 2 solid clients with next stage bio advisors right now. I'd love to get that to 3 to 5. I'd love to set the stage for something where I've got enough critical mass in client work that maybe I can go acquire a firm and just scale it even more. Right. So that's, quite literally the business plan for next stage bio advisors this year. And then with the Catalytic Collective, I would love to expand those experiences beyond virtual events into perhaps maybe a retreat by the end of the year where we bring everyone together from across all of the markets that we're having these virtual conversations into something, a really meaningful kind of year-end planning, reset, launch for 2027 event. So that's hopefully the year ahead for me and my businesses.
That sounds dreamy. Now, I'm just putting out there and volunteering my services. Retreat is my cup of tea. I'm a big believer in self-care and rejuvenation. So if you need somebody to come and be chief vibes officer and facilitate or do something, holla at your boy. I'm right there.
I love that idea.
We'll come wherever.
On an exotic place to have it, someplace fabulous.
I'm just put Mauritius. I mean, it's far, but it is delicious. We could do Mauritius. You name it. I haven't explored much of the US. It's huge. It's probably why many people don't want to or need to leave, because you've got everything, really, haven't you? But yeah, you name it, and we can pick that up separately.
Right. That's a plan. I love it.
Thank you. We're hatching. You see, we're hatching.
Yeah, that's how these things happen.
So no, I wish you every success in that, and I have no doubt, you know, having seen your background and your trajectory and heard more of your story now than our previous conversation as well, that you will continue to figure it out and make those intuitive, meaningful choices. But I want to say a huge thank you for what has been for me such a insightful but honest conversation, you know, about the challenges of finding your path and sometimes swimming against the tide and leaving a company, you know, in a sense where people were probably like, you're doing what? Like,
Yes,
you're
stay first.
stay there, like stay, like you got in, stay. But what really stands out is this idea that fulfillment isn't about choosing between ambition and purpose, but really about integrating them. And I think for anyone, whether they're building a company, leading a team, or redefining success on their own terms, like the Catalytic Collective do, there's power in designing your next stage intentionally. That
Yes.
intentionally is the word that's with me. So I really hope for anyone tuning in this conversation, I know it will resonate and they can share it with someone who's navigating their own career pivot, life pivot, so that they can follow your progress and your journey with interest. And maybe if they fall into the right category, can come on this retreat or some of the activations that no doubt you'll have in the months and the years to come, you know. So thank you so much, Sonya. It's been a real pleasure and uplifted as well, you know.
Thank you. No, this has been wonderful, and I'm so glad to have connected with you, and thank you for this opportunity.
No worries. All right, well, keep well, and we will be speaking, not least because we've got a retreat to plan.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Take
You
care.
too.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.